You've seen it in your dreams. A wise old man offering guidance at a crossroads. A nurturing figure who appears when you're most vulnerable. A trickster who disrupts your carefully laid plans. A shadow that follows you through dark corridors. These aren't random images conjured by your sleeping mind. They're archetypes, ancient patterns that have shaped human consciousness since our species first gathered around fires to tell stories. They live in your psyche right now, influencing your choices, coloring your relationships, and whispering truths about who you are beneath the surface of your everyday identity. Tonight, we're going deep into the architecture of the unconscious to understand these universal patterns that Jung spent his lifetime mapping. Welcome to Deep Psyche Lab. I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time exploring these ideas with us, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We create content that takes psychology seriously, that treats your inner world with the respect and curiosity it deserves. Tonight's journey into archetypes will change how you see yourself and everyone around you. This isn't abstract theory. This is about recognizing the invisible forces that have been shaping your story all along. Carl Jung discovered something revolutionary in the early 20th century. While treating patients and analyzing thousands of dreams, he noticed patterns repeating across cultures, across time periods, across individual lives that had no connection to each other. A woman in Zurich would dream of descending into an underworld. A man in New York would sketch images of mandalas without knowing their significance in Eastern religion. Children would create stories containing the same heroic journey structure found in myths from ancient Mesopotamia. Jung realized these patterns weren't learned, they were inherited, embedded in what he called the collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche shared by all humanity. Archetypes are the building blocks of this collective unconscious. Think of them as psychological organs, structures we're all born with. Just as we're born with hearts and lungs, you don't learn to have a heart. You don't decide to develop lungs. They're part of your biological inheritance. Archetypes work the same way in your psychological inheritance. They're universal patterns of being, thinking, and relating that exist in every human psyche, waiting to be activated by life experience. When you fall in love, the archetypal pattern of the anima or animus constellates in your unconscious. When you face a crisis that demands courage, the hero archetype awakens. When you encounter something that disrupts your order, the trickster appears. These aren't metaphors. Jung believed they were real, autonomous forces within the psyche. Let's be clear about what archetypes are and what they're not. An archetype is not a fixed image. It's not a specific character or a rigid template. Jung described archetypes as forms without content, like the structure of a crystal before it takes physical shape. The archetype itself is invisible, a kind of magnetic field in the unconscious. What you experience are archetypal images, the specific ways these patterns manifest in dreams, fantasies, myths, and lived experience. The mother archetype, for instance, exists as a primordial pattern, but it appears in countless images. The actual mother, Mother Earth, the Virgin Mary, a fairy godmother, a witch, the ocean, a cave, a garden. All these images cluster around the same archetypal core, the same fundamental pattern of nurturing, containing, and bringing forth life. This distinction matters because people often misunderstand archetypes as stereotypes or simple categories. They'll say someone is a hero type or playing the victim, reducing complex human beings to cardboard cutouts. But archetypes are infinitely more subtle and powerful than that. They're dynamic, alive, contradictory. The mother can nurture or devour. The hero can save or destroy. The wise old man can guide or deceive. Every archetype contains its shadow, its opposite potential. Understanding archetypes means recognizing that you contain multitudes, that these patterns within you are in constant dialogue, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in fierce conflict. Jung identified several major archetypes that appear consistently across cultures and throughout human history. Let's explore them, not as a catalog to memorize, but as a map to your own inner landscape. As we move through these, pay attention to which ones resonates, which ones you recognize operating in your life right now. The self stands at the center of Jung's archetypal system. It's the archetype of wholeness, the totality of your conscious and unconscious mind. The self is both what you are and what you're trying to become. It's the organizing principle of your psyche, constantly working to integrate all the scattered pieces of your personality into something coherent and meaningful. You've experienced the self in moments of profound unity, times when everything suddenly made sense, when you felt connected to something larger than your individual ego. Religious mystics call this God or enlightenment. Jung called it the self. In dreams, the self often appears as mandalas, perfect geometric patterns, sacred figures, or radiant lights. It's the destination of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. The ego, which Jung also considered an archetype, is your conscious sense of I. It's the part of you reading these words right now, thinking, deciding, moving through daily life. The ego is necessary. It gives you continuity, allows you to function in the world, maintains your identity across time. But the ego is not the totality of who you are. Jung compared the ego to our island in the ocean of the unconscious. The island thinks it's separate, independent, but beneath the waves, it's connected to the vast flow of the sea, to depths it doesn't know exist. One of the great dangers in modern life is ego inflation, believing the conscious self is all there is, cutting yourself off from the unconscious, and becoming thin, brittle, disconnected from the source.
The shadow is perhaps Jung's most famous contribution to psychology, and certainly the most misunderstood. Your shadow isn't simply your dark side or your flaws. It's everything about yourself that your ego doesn't identify with, everything that contradicts your self-image. If you think of yourself as kind, your shadow contains your cruelty. If you pride yourself on rationality, your shadow holds your irrationality. If you present as strong, your shadow harbors your vulnerability. The shadow forms in childhood when you learn what's acceptable and what must be hidden. Your parents, your culture, your experiences teach you which qualities earn love and which bring rejection. The unacceptable qualities don't disappear. They go underground, forming the shadow. The problem with the shadow isn't that it exists. The problem is that we refuse to acknowledge it. What you don't own in yourself, you project onto others. You see your unacknowledged aggression in other people and call them hostile. You spot your suppressed sexuality in others and judge them as immoral. You notice your hidden weakness in someone else and feel contempt. Jung said the projection of the shadow is responsible for most of the evil in the world. We don't see people as they are. We see them contaminated by our own disowned qualities. The work of integrating the shadow, bringing it into consciousness and accepting it as part of yourself, is essential for psychological maturity. This doesn't mean acting on every dark impulse. It means acknowledging that these impulses exist within you, that you're capable of the same things you condemn in others, that your goodness is incomplete without awareness of your capacity for harm. Meeting your shadow is uncomfortable, sometimes terrifying. I've seen this in my own life countless times. That flash of rage at someone's success, quickly suppressed and rationalized away. That moment of petty satisfaction when someone I envied experienced failure. That impulse to manipulate a situation to my advantage while maintaining an image of fairness. These aren't pleasant recognitions, but acknowledging them made me more whole, more human, more able to act with genuine integrity rather than performing goodness to maintain my self-image. Your shadow knows things your ego doesn't want to admit. It has energy, vitality, creativity that your conscious personality has disowned. Reclaiming your shadow doesn't make you evil. It makes you real. The persona is the mask you wear in the world, the social role you perform. The word comes from the Latin for the masks actors wore in ancient theater. Your persona is how you present yourself to others. The professional at work, the parent at home, the friend in social situations. Like the ego, the persona is necessary for functioning in society. Problems arise when you identify completely with your persona, when you mistake the mask for your face. Jung saw this constantly in his practice. Successful men who had so thoroughly become their professional roles that they had no idea who they were underneath. Women who had merged so completely with the mother persona that when their children left home, they experience devastating identity crises. The persona is meant to be a flexible tool, something you can put on and take off. When it becomes rigid, when you're trapped inside it, you lose connection to your genuine self. The anima and animus represent the contrasexual archetypes. The anima is the unconscious feminine aspect in men. The animus is the unconscious masculine aspect in women. These terms can feel outdated, tied to gender binaries that our current understanding has moved beyond. But Jung wasn't talking about biological sex or gender identity. He was describing complementary psychological principles. The anima represents relatedness, emotion, intuition, the bridge to the unconscious. The animus represents focused consciousness, discrimination, assertion, directed thinking. Every person, regardless of gender, contains both principles. Problems arise when these internal figures remain unconscious and get projected onto actual people. You fall in love with someone who carries your anima projection, seeing them as your perfect complement, your soulmate, but you're not seeing the real person. You're seeing your own unconscious personified. When the projection fails, as it inevitably does, you feel betrayed, not realizing the betrayal is discovering that the other person was never who you imagined them to be. Developing a relationship with your anima or animus means withdrawing these projections and encountering these figures within yourself. For men, this often means learning to value emotion, intuition, connection, qualities dismissed as weakness by conventional masculine conditioning. For women, this often means claiming intellectual authority, assertiveness, independence, qualities often discouraged by cultural expectations. When you integrate these contrasexual aspects, you become more complete, less dependent on others to supply what you're missing in yourself. Your relationships become encounters between two whole people rather than transactions between halves seeking completion. The mother archetype appears in every culture throughout human history. She's the source of life, the nurturer, the container, the first relationship every human being knows. The mother is the Garden of Eden, the promised land, nature itself in its abundance. She's comfort, safety, the place you can return to for sustenance and rest. But the mother archetype contains a dark side that sentimental culture often ignores. The mother who gives life can also devour it. The mother who nurtures can also suffocate. Every containing space is also a prison. The womb that shelters is also the place you must leave to become yourself. Jung spoke of the devouring mother, the aspect of the archetype that keeps her children dependent, that prevents growth, that consumes individuality in the name of care. You see the mother archetype not just in actual mothers, but in institutions, nations, the church, the earth itself. We speak of motherland and mother tongue. We call nature Mother Earth. These aren't random metaphors. They point to the archetypal pattern activated by anything that provides, protects, and contains. Understanding the mother archetype helps you recognize when you're caught in its grip. Maybe you can't leave a relationship that no longer serves you because it feels like abandoning mother. Maybe you sabotage your own success because independence feels like betrayal of the nurturing force that raised you. Maybe you're endlessly searching for someone to take care of you, repeating the pattern of infantile dependence. Or maybe you've become the devouring mother yourself, unable to let others grow and separate, needing them to need you. The father archetype represents law, order, authority, structure. Where the mother is nature, the father is culture. Where the mother is the unconscious, the father is consciousness. The father teaches you to navigate the world beyond the mother's embrace. He represents the rules you must learn, the discipline required for mastery, the standards you must meet to earn respect. But like all archetypes, the father contains contradictions. The father who gives order can become tyrannical. The father who teaches standards can crush spontaneity. The father who represents authority can demand blind obedience. Jung was acutely aware that the father could be both protective and destructive. That patriarchal power could provide structure or enforce rigid conformity. Not in contemporary life. Many people struggle with the father archetype. Some never internalized healthy paternal energy and remain psychologically adolescent, unable to provide structure for themselves. reflexively rebelling against all authority. Others carry a harsh internal father, a voice of impossible standards and constant criticism. Still, others have had to become their own fathers, learning to provide for themselves the guidance and limits they never received. Understanding the father archetype helps you examine your relationship with authority, both external and internal. Do you submit icily to those who claim power over you? Do you reject all structure and discipline as oppression? Can you differentiate between legitimate authority and tyranny? Have you developed your own internal father, a guiding principle that provides direction without crushing spontaneity?
Hero archetype is the pattern of the individual who leaves the familiar world, confronts challenges, defeats enemies, and returns transformed with gifts for the community. Joseph Campbell famously mapped this monomyth across cultures, showing how the hero's journey appears in stories from ancient Greece to modern cinema. But the hero isn't just a character in myths. The hero is a pattern in your own life, activated whenever you face a challenge that demands growth. Every time you leave what's comfortable and venture into unknown territory, the hero archetype constellates within you, starting a new job, ending a relationship that's become toxic, confronting a difficult truth about yourself. These are heroic acts in the psychological sense. The danger of the hero archetype is inflation. Our culture glorifies the hero, teaches you to identify with strength, independence, triumph over obstacles. This creates a one-sided consciousness that can't tolerate vulnerability, that sees needing help as weakness, that exhausts itself trying to conquer every problem through willpower alone. Jung understood that the hero must eventually die. The heroic ego must be sacrificed for something larger to emerge. In myths, this often appears as the hero's death and rebirth. Psychologically, it means letting go of the inflated ego, admitting you don't have all the answers, accepting your limitations, surrendering to forces greater than your individual will. This doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing that true strength includes the capacity to be weak, that real courage involves acknowledging fear, that wisdom knows when to fight and when to yield. The trickster is one of the oldest archetypes in human mythology. He appears as Loki in Norse tradition, Coyote in Native American stories, Hermes in Greek myth, the Fool in tarot. The trickster disrupts order, breaks rules, mocks authority, subverts expectations. He's the chaos that invades your carefully structured life. The trickster can be cruel, obscene, foolish, destructive, but he's also creative, innovative, the force that breaks rigid patterns and allows new possibilities to emerge. When your plans fall apart in absurd ways, when you make a Freudian slip that reveals what you were trying to hide, when coincidence seems to mock your rational explanations, the trickster is active in your psyche. The trickster reminds you that the ego isn't in control. That consciousness is a small island in a vast, unconscious sea. He humbles you, often through humiliation, but he also liberates you from taking yourself too seriously, from the rigidity of persona and ego identification in your own life. The trickster might appear as the impulse to do something unexpected, to break your routine, to say what you're not supposed to say. He's the part of you that wants to disrupt the status quo, even when disruption is uncomfortable. Learning to work with the trickster rather than suppress him entirely allows for creativity, spontaneity, and psychological flexibility. But the trickster must be balanced. Too much identification with trickster energy leads to instability, inability to commit, endless disruption without constructive purpose. The wise old man and wise old woman archetypes represent the voice of wisdom within you. They appear in dreams as teachers, guides, mentors, oracles. They're Gandalf, Dumbledore, Yoda in popular culture, but also the inner voice that sometimes speaks with clarity beyond your normal understanding. These archetypal figures carry knowledge that your ego doesn't possess. They connect you to the wisdom of the collective unconscious, to insights accumulated over human history. When you have a sudden realization that shifts your entire perspective, when you know something without knowing how you know it, the wise old man or woman archetype is operating within you. But these archetypes, like all others, have shadow aspects. The wise old man can become the synex, rigid and authoritarian, stuck in the past, unable to adapt to new circumstances. The wise old woman can become the witch, using knowledge to manipulate and control, rather than guide and heal. In your own psyche, you might notice the shadow wise old man as the voice that insists you already know everything, that dismisses new ideas as foolish trends, that calculates cynically rather than engages authentically. Integrating the positive aspect of these archetypes means developing genuine wisdom, the capacity to see patterns, understand contexts, and offer guidance without imposing your will on others. The child archetype represents new beginnings, innocence, potential, spontaneity. Jung distinguished between different aspects of the child: the divine child, full of promise and destined for greatness; the wounded child, carrying the hurts and traumas that shaped your personality; the orphan child, abandoned and forced to become so; the eternal child, or pure etterness, forever young, forever seeking novelty, unable to commit to the limitations of adult life. Every person carries all these aspects of the child archetype in varying proportions. Understanding your inner child isn't the sentimental exercise popular psychology sometimes makes it. It's recognizing how childhood experiences created patterns that still operate in your adult life. The wounded child within you might still be seeking approval, still avoiding conflict, still believing you're not enough. The orphan child might have made you fiercely independent, but unable to trust others for support. The eternal child might keep you chasing the next exciting thing, unable to build anything lasting. Working with the child archetype means acknowledging these patterns with compassion, while also developing the capacity to parent yourself, to provide the stability, boundaries, and nurturing that allows growth beyond childhood conditioning. Archetypes don't exist in isolation. They interact, conflict, cooperate, forming the complex drama of your inner life. Your ego might identify with the hero, while your shadow carries the coward. Your persona might present the wise man, while your inner child feels confused and lost. Your anima might seek merger, while your father archetype demands independence. These internal tensions create psychological suffering, but they're also the engine of growth. Jung's process of individuation, becoming who you truly are, requires recognizing these archetypal patterns, differentiating them, and integrating them into a more complete sense of self. You might be wondering how to work with archetypes practically. Start by paying attention to your dreams. Dreams speak in archetypal language. That figure pursuing you in nightmares might be your shadow. That guiding presence might be the wise old man or woman. That child in danger might represent your own vulnerable inner child. Don't interpret dreams simplistically, as if every symbol has one fixed meaning. Instead, feel into the images. Notice what they evoke emotionally. Ask what part of yourself they might represent. Keep a dream journal. Notice patterns over time. The unconscious is trying to communicate, showing you aspects of yourself that consciousness has ignored. Pay attention to your projections. Those moments when you have intense reactions to other people, when someone annoys you disproportionately to what they've actually done. You're likely encountering your shadow. When you idealize someone and feel that everything you're not, you're projecting an archetype, probably the anima, animus, or an aspect of the self. Ask yourself what quality you're seeing in the other person. Then ask whether you might possess that quality yourself, but disown it. This is uncomfortable work. It's easier to believe your reactions are about other people than to recognize them as mirrors reflecting your own unconscious. Notice the stories that captivate you, the myths, films, novels, and narratives that move you most deeply are probably constellating active archetypes in your psyche. If you're drawn to stories of the lone hero overcoming impossible odds, the hero archetype is strong in you, and you might need to examine both its gifts and its shadows. If you love trickster tales, examine your relationship to chaos and order. If stories of lost children finding their way home move you to tears, your inner child is asking for attention. Your aesthetic preferences aren't random. They point to the archetypal patterns most alive in you right now. Active imagination is a practice Jung developed for engaging archetypes directly. In a relaxed state, you allow an archetypal figure from a dream or fantasy to appear in your imagination. Then you engage in dialogue with this figure, asking questions, listening to responses, allowing the interaction to unfold. This isn't pretending or making things up. When done properly, active imagination reveals material from the unconscious that surprises you. That contradicts your conscious intentions, that knows things your ego doesn't know. This practice requires training and should ideally be done with guidance from someone experienced in depth psychology, but even simple forms of it, like writing letters to an inner figure or imagining conversations with different parts of yourself, can provide insight. The goal of working with archetypes isn't to master them or transcend them, it's to develop a relationship with them, to recognize them as autonomous forces within your psyche that deserve respect. When you ignore archetypes, they don't disappear. They operate unconsciously, possessing you, driving behavior you don't understand. When you bring them into consciousness, you create space for choice. You can feel the pull of an archetype without being identified with it completely. You can recognize when the hero in you needs to rest, or when the trickster needs expression, or when the child needs comfort. You become more flexible, more capable of responding appropriately to different situations rather than repeating the same patterns. Regardless of context, Jung believed archetypes were ultimately numinous, meaning they carry a quality of the sacred. When an archetype fully constellates, you feel it as more than a psychological pattern. You feel touched by something vast and ancient, something that connects you to all humanity across time. Religious experiences, mystical visions, profound artistic inspiration, all involve the activation of archetypes. This doesn't reduce religion to psychology or dismiss the reality of spiritual experience. It suggests that the psyche itself is structured to encounter the sacred, that archetypes are the forms to which human beings apprehend the transcendent. In our current cultural moment, many people feel disconnected from archetypal dimensions of experience. We live in a literalized, rationalized world that dismisses myth as primitive superstition, that reduces everything to material causes, that pathologizes symbolic thinking. This has costs. Without access to archetypal depth, life becomes flat, meaningless, a series of problems to solve, rather than a journey to undertake. The revival of interest in Jung, in mythology, in depth psychology generally, reflects a hunger for something our culture isn't providing. People sense that the scientific materialist worldview, valuable as it is for certain purposes, doesn't address the soul's needs, doesn't help us make meaning, doesn't connect us to sources of vitality and purpose. Understanding archetypes won't solve all your problems. It won't make difficult choices easier or painful experiences less painful, but it will give you a different relationship to your experience. You'll recognize that your personal struggles are also universal patterns, that you're living out dramas that have been lived countless times before. This doesn't diminish your uniqueness. It connects your individual story to the larger human story. You'll see that the forces moving within you are older than you are, that you're not just a product of your biography, but a vessel for patterns that transcend individual existence. This perspective can be liberating. It takes some of the weight off the ego, which exhausts itself trying to control everything through willpower. It invites a kind of cooperation with your depths rather than warfare against them. There's a profound humility that comes from recognizing archetypal patterns in yourself. The hero discovers he's also the coward. The wise man encounters his foolishness. The nurturer finds the devourer within. This isn't relativism or nihilism. It's wholeness. It's recognizing that human nature contains opposites. That maturity means holding both sides rather than identifying with one and projecting the other. This capacity to contain contradictions, to be both strong and vulnerable, rational and emotional, individual and connected, is what Jung meant by psychological health. It's not about eliminating the difficult parts of yourself. It's about expanding consciousness enough to include them, to recognize them as aspects of the totality you are. In closing, remember that this exploration is educational, an invitation to understand the structures Jung mapped over decades of careful work. This isn't therapy, and learning about archetypes isn't a substitute for working with a qualified therapist if you're struggling with psychological difficulties, but understanding these patterns can enrich your life, deepen yours, and connect you to dimensions of experience that rationalism alone can't access. I hope this journey into the architecture of the unconscious has given you new eyes for seeing yourself and others. The archetypes are always active, always shaping your experience, whether you're conscious of them or not. The question is whether you'll develop a relationship with them or remain possessed by forces you don't understand. If this exploration resonated with you, take a moment to like this video. It helps others find this content. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I contain multitudes," to let me know which archetype you recognized most strongly in yourself. Subscribe to Deep Psyche Lab for more explorations of depth psychology and the landscapes of the unconscious. Turn on notifications so you don't miss future journeys into these territories. Thank you for taking this time to look inward, to question, to explore the depths. Until next time, walk gently with your shadows and listen for the voice of wisdom within.